Hi, I'm JL Collins, the creator-writer of Thistle Issue One, and you can find me on social media, the site formerly known as Twitter, at digital_Collins, and you can find me on Blue Sky at Digital Collins, and you can find me on Linktree as JL Collins, and you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Hi, I'm Leland Bjerg, editor and letterer of Thistle. You can find me online at Linktree/Leland Writes. You're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Hi, I'm Schiek. I'm the principal line artist on Thistle #1, currently on Kickstarter. You can find me online at www.jschiek.com or on your favorite social media platforms at Schiekapedia. Oh, and you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by three very talented individual people. So it's not really Two Geeks Talking, it's Four Geeks Talking, but I've branded for this long, so I can't change the name of the show. But we have our creator-writer of Thistle, we have the editor-letterer of Thistle, and we have the artist of Thistle, and you've seen him on past interviews as well. We're joined by the ever-talented JL Collins, Leland Bjerg, and of course, Jay Schiek. How are you guys doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I love Zoom. I at some point I'm going to figure out how to put three people on a screen. That way it's not like... For those that don't know anything about yourselves as creative people, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Thanks, Kurt. So I'm JL Collins, Jason Collins. I am a freelance comic book writer, freelance tabletop role-playing game designer, done some actual play streaming for role-playing games, and once upon a time I wrote a short story for Wizards of the Coast set in the Forgotten Realms. Today I'm bringing Thistle Issue 1, which is our dark fantasy survival horror comic. It is the first in what we hope to be a series, and it is the story of a elf trapped behind enemy lines fighting for his survival against the hordes of the Necromancer. It's a love letter to old sword and sorcery comics and movies and games of the past. Absolutely beautifully illustrated. We are really excited to share it with everybody, and we have a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter that is live right now, but we're halfway through, even a little less than halfway through by the time everyone gets to see this. And so we are really hoping that we can connect with a few more backers who have that same love for old school fantasy, sword and sorcery, Dungeons and Dragons, whatever flavor it is that you have, because this delivers all of those in spades, and we're really proud of this book.
Yeah, I'm Leland Bjerg, and I am a freelance comic writer, editor, and letterer. For Thistle, provided my editor and letterer capacities. Jason and I are good friends. We're from the same region. I think a lot of indie comics collabs over the internet. It's really cool to get to work with one of my buddies who I hang out with.
I'm Jay Schiek. I am a freelance comic book artist and art professor. Existential Crisis Made Flesh. I'm bringing it as hard as I can, as often as I can, with the line art, as well as this Celtic knotwork tapestry you see behind me. I'm wrestling with my caffeine this morning and doing good.
Hey, as long as everyone's caffeinated in some capacity, then that makes the day go by a lot better. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I was very fortunate to read Thistle, and I have to say, beautiful colors, great characters. Like, it was very easy to read. You got really into the actual character itself. Just beautiful from page 1 to the end, and I can't wait to see if there's more ahead, which I do hope there is more ahead. But what is it about Thistle when you were creating this, JL, that you really had to just get the story out?
Yes. So with Thistle, it's kind of a mixture of a love of all of my favorite things. So comic books and role-playing games and fantasy, sort of that desperate hero fighting for survival story that we all love so much. But with Thistle, I just had this burning urge to, if I'm going to tell a fantasy story, being a kid of the 80s, growing up on Saturday morning cartoons and Dungeons and Dragons and comic books, we read that hero's journey fantasy story so many times. We love that story. It's one of our favorite stories, but I didn't want to just retell another origin story. So I thought, what if I did this differently? What if we started at the end? What if the war is over? What if the enemy, the Necromancer, the foil for everybody, has won their campaign and has devastated everyone's homelands, and now there's one final mission of revenge to go and see if they can just get their revenge on that enemy before everything is lost forever. And so I sort of started at it from that perspective where like, okay, there's this elf who is alone fighting behind enemy lines, desperate to survive, but also driven by a singular purpose of trying to right a wrong. It's too late to save all the people back home, but maybe it's not too late to stick it to them one last time and kind of avenge all of the fallen that you had. So a lot of those fantasy tropes and classic elements that we love, the comic is action-packed, page to page. Like it's just filled with that singular story. But the idea that we start at the end, the tagline I sometimes use is, when is the end the beginning? Because yes, this is issue 1. There is more story to come after this, but that's only if Thistle survives this first issue, and that's only if our campaign makes it to the end of the month with enough backers to get us to print so that we can share this with everybody.
That's not a call to action. I don't know what is. Leland, looking at yourself as the editor and letterer, what is it about the script of Thistle, that reading the script of Thistle, that just made you want to be the editor and letterer of this series?
I mean, I am also a giant fantasy geek. I've got fantastical landscapes on my walls here, giant Lord of the Rings fan, and I'm just a giant fan of Jason too. His work is excellent. We do workshops together on a regular basis, and so I got to see Thistle come into being from, a short that he wrote. Part of
it was for the comic school event that Gail Simone ran on Twitter.
Yeah,
back in
yeah,
2020,
okay,
2021.
Yeah, for Gail Simone. This has just been growing, and I've got to watch it grow. And I think Jason has succeeded in doing what I'm always looking for from a story is stuff I love put together in a way that I haven't seen before. I think that's one of the greatest strengths of this story is it's sort of Lord of the Rings meets The Walking Dead meets a military survival story. I've been calling it Lord of the Rings meets Rambo. And tonally it works, it works beautifully. It's all coming together. Like we've had a few readers say like, this feels like Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, I think Jason was surprised by that. I was totally surprised by that. But as soon as people said it, it totally resonated and was like, oh yeah, this is what this story is. The high fantasy look of it made it invisible even to us as we were working on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it was definitely beautiful. It almost had a hint of 1917 as well. Just that singular journey of a singular focus towards an end goal. Yeah, I think that was interesting too. Jay, obviously you're a very talented artist. We've had you on in the past as well, and you keep pushing your creative boundaries. And I think this was a wonderful story for you to draw. Just an incredible story that I definitely want to see more issues of. What was it when you read the script you thought, I have to draw this right away? What was that first image that popped into your mind?
It's hard to say for sure. When I first started getting into illustration as a kid, I was cutting my teeth on scenes from Lord of the Rings. Always been a very big Lord of the Rings and fantasy fan. In fact, I'm wearing my Ring of Power here right now. For me, in getting into comics, it was less about just getting to draw high fantasy, but the sheer variety of things that I get to draw. And I really like how Leland put it, getting to see things that I love put together in a new way or in a way I haven't seen before. Having been part of this story for a while now and seeing it evolve, seeing different aspects of it, glimpses of what comes after what we've just done. And it's just been extremely enticing from the start to get to dive into that world and flesh it out visually. I hadn't gotten to do a project like that yet, at least not in my professional career. It was impossible to say no to.
What is the misconception about high fantasy that people who don't follow the genre misunderstand?
Misconception, as far as misconceptions go, I mean, high fantasy has a lot of tropes. It has a lot of familiarity because it's been revisited over and over. And I, by no means, will claim to be an expert in terms of deciphering those. But in terms of misconceptions, right, for us, in terms of, North American fantasy fans, there's that Western fantasy bent where it's very European, it's very white, it's just very, the fantasy races all look and sound the same. There's a lot of stereotypes that occur, of course. I think that for some of that, it can just be a bit tired. It can be a little bit, been there, done that. So there's always a risk of that. And so with Thistle, that's why I was conscious enough to say, okay, I don't want to do the hero's journey, and I don't want to just do elves in the forest and dwarves in the mountain, and I don't just want to have, a sort of all the classic tropes. I thought, okay, I'll take everybody out of their element. I'll put them into a desperate situation. We pretty much start with the final battle. and it just goes like gangbusters from there. And it's all about Thistle's ingenuity and his survival skills in surviving long enough to see if he can track down his enemy, how he uses his skills, how he uses his weapons, how he uses magic in creative ways, which is what Leland was talking about in terms of seeing new things. That was some of his earliest compliments, was just he really enjoyed some of the creativity and some of the action sequences and how we use the traditional things like magic weapons or spells in new and different ways, so that it's, you know, the character being creative and surviving using their wits, not just their brawn. And that was super attractive to me in terms of a storytelling standpoint, and that was something that I dove into happily.
I would come on just mostly just to agree with what Jason is saying, the familiar and tried kind of tropes, because fantasy is, you know, very much a genre, and it was a description I heard from Neil Gaiman a couple of times, where he describes genre as that thing that, you know, you come to the story to read and you would be disappointed if it wasn't there. So it'd be like reading a Western that didn't have a shootout at high noon, or a romance without a love scene or something. And, you know, with fantasy, there's a lot of those different aspects to it. It could be a sword fight, could be a wizard casting a spell, it could be a dragon, you know, whatever that happens to be. And I think that it holds to those genre points. People are not going to walk away from Thistle disappointed, but they are going to see something new with it. I mean, as far as this book goes to other fantasy books out there, I'm trying to tread new ground without walking all over what Jason just said, because I think he hit the nail on the head with it. This isn't just a D&D adventure made into a comic. It's more than that. And I think that might be the perception of others that, okay, this is just more of the same. It's like the Dragonlance novel series, or things that people kind of get used to seeing out there.
It's hard when you have three people answering the same question, when everyone is so well versed in the amazing styles and areas that you all love. So I'm not expecting completely different answers from these questions. If something resonates with you all, then feel free to, he did it. That's good. So don't feel like you have to answer. I'll just deal with the awkward silence. That's okay. You know, collaboration is always important, especially when you have multiple people. Usually when I have someone on the show, they're either a single entity where they're the writer, artist, or I'll be fortunate enough to get two people on the show and they're the one's the writer, one's the artist. And the fact that we have all three of you here together, this is, I think, treading new ground, at least in terms of an interview style for me, because everyone is well versed in their respective areas. But what is it about working with each other that makes the process smoother?
I'm going to cede my time to let Jay and Leland talk, because they've collaborated on several stories now. But I wanted to take a quick moment to plug the fourth member of the team who couldn't be here with us, and that's our colorist, WK Sahadiwa. She's an Indonesian colorist, so the time zone difference makes it difficult for her to join these sessions sometimes. But I wanted to make sure that everybody knew when they're looking at the colors of the book that there's a fourth member of the team who's just absolutely elevated this book to another level. And the compliments that we've had on the colors from her contribution have just been amazing. And so I wanted to make sure that we, get her name out there as well, so people can look her up and find her as well. My short answer before I let the team talk is that the collaboration on this story is the reason why it looks as good as it does. It's the reason why we have just created something that we're so proud of, because we all just respect each other's expertise, but we all contribute, we all challenge each other, come up with new ideas. I have written things for Jay that he has said, this is great, but it totally doesn't work and I'm going to fix it. And then he went to work and he was absolutely right and he fixed it. So there's no egos in the room. Everybody is here to serve the story and to make it the best it possibly can be and to work with each other's strengths. And I absolutely want Jay and Leland to speak to that, because I know they've collaborated a couple of times and the collaboration is getting stronger as they go.
I've had the privilege of working with Jay quite a bit. When I first lettered Jay's art, I found it quite challenging. He's got a softer sort of style. He uses softer brushes. It's basically the antithesis of the vector art that's standard for lettering in comics. At first, it was a real challenge to come up with balloon styles and sound effect styles that felt natural with his art. A personal pet peeve of mine is a comic with a different sort of, an art style other than hard outlines and cell shading, like a beautiful painterly looking comic or an actual hand painted comic, and then somebody's just put a vector word balloon on top with a hard, perfectly straight line around it. It just clashes so hard for me. So the first couple of projects Jay and I did together, I was experimenting with different balloons and figuring out how to get things sitting nicely in the art. But it really, how lucky I was, because it leveled me up a ton having to meet that challenge. And I still feel like I've got stuff to figure out, but at this point, I think I've lettered about 150 pages or more of Jay's work, and it feels really good now. It feels like we're in a good place, and I've got a handle on his art, and it's so cool to get to make beautiful things together and be sent these amazing pages that he does and add those extra touches. And lettering's a small job, but it's an important job in comics. You can, as people point out, a letterer can sure ruin the letterers might not get a lot of credit, but they can sure ruin a comic fast. So, I'm always trying to not ruin Jay's pages and just enhance them and bring them to life. Comics page without the letters is half alive. There's something about the words causing you to linger on particular panels that, and lead you through the page that really does make a comic breathe in a way that, even a gorgeous page alone, it's not quite the same.
That was the one thing I noticed. Well, one thing I didn't notice was the fact that it was so subtle. It just was a part of the page that I was going along panel by panel, reading through it and not realizing I was reading, because it was just, everything just looks.
Oh, well, thank you. That is literally the best compliment a letterer can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you match the style, the watercolor style with Jay's work. You match the colorist's style as well. Like, I think all in all, it was just a really beautiful read from start to finish, and I was immersed, as I mentioned previously. It's just, I think that there's so much more that can be told, and I really want this campaign to succeed for sure. And now I'll let Jay talk about the art, because I'm gushing now at this point. So
I think what's helped make us work as a team is the sort of, call us like a parallel party. It's almost like this project has been a D&D game in itself, and we're all cooperating and collaborating together to bring about a shared goal. And in a way, it feels very much like that. And we're all aware of each other's specific skills and abilities, our talents, perhaps some of our, areas of opportunity, how well that has just synthesized to create what we've got. And, working with Leland on Hush Ronin, there's a 9-panel grid from Hush Ronin #2 that I'm thinking of. And something that I try to shoot for with the line art is, if this page never had any lettering on it, would it still carry the story idea across? Would there be enough visual information here for the reader to get the sense of what is still going on? And there's certainly some pages where I feel like that's left a bit ambiguous on my end. Leland has come in and he's just been the better half. He completes the art with what he does. I feel like letterers don't get enough credit for what they do. Liken it to like the sound design on a film, where you can have the best quality video or film or visuals, 4K, what have you. But if you've got bad audio, it's an unwatchable movie. And in the same way, a comic with bad lettering becomes completely unreadable. That long time collaboration with Leland, I think, has helped a lot with the alley-oop or the assist. I know I can pass the ball into his court with a little spin on it, and he's going to catch it and sink it.
Good sports references. That's really well done.
And Kurt, you talk about just enjoying reading the book, that you didn't feel like you were reading a comic and seeing all the parts of it. You were just enjoying the story, which, as Leland said, is an immense compliment. Leland and I had a ton of fun as Leland was lettering the book and would send me the pages, and we would look at it, and we would be brainstorming the ideas to make it fit within the panels and to make it match Jay's art, and to make sure that we were doing things that weren't jarring and that were cinematic, for lack of a better word, to fit into it. And there are so many pages in the book that are just fun. They're just fun to read, and they've got sound effects, and they've got captions, and they've got noises happening, and it's just, but it all just, it fits within the comic, and Leland made it his mission to make sure that every time he was adding in a new sound effect or a new set of dialogue or words, that it matched the tone of the book. And so it was I think part of his personal drive to achieve that, and it's clear to me that he did so absolutely. But it was fun seeing that come to fame. It was one of those few times when it wasn't the grind of making the comic, it was the joy of making the comic, and it was a huge part of that.
Well, I mean, if you don't enjoy making a comic, then why are you doing it? I mean,
Not for
completely agree
money,
with
that's
that.
for sure.
Hey, you can make money in comics. What? No, I kid. You know, everyone usually asks, "What's the wisest piece of advice?" or "What's the most BS piece of advice you've ever received?" But what is the second wisest piece of advice that you've received that's stuck with you in your career?
I got one. I was lucky enough to, I got really into making comics 8 or 9 years ago. And as it turned out, a professional comic writer lived on my block. I got to be friends with Ed Brisson. He's since moved to the East Coast. The piece of advice he gave was write shorts, because I was working on a big 20-issue epic thing. And yeah, to get from somebody in the industry like, hey, I broke into the industry with Murder Book. It was a collection of short crime stories I wrote. Short stories are great. And I took that advice and ran with it and started making my own shorts and finishing things and building collections out of short stories. And that's some wisdom that I spread to everybody that I talk to.
In terms of recent times, the classic advice for every writer, which is write every day or write, a set amount, and just make sure you keep at it, so forth and so forth. But a recent one that it's like an advice to myself. It's advice that my spouse and I talk about with each other. Leland talked earlier about how we get together and we have workshops, and there's a group of us in our local geographic area here in British Columbia that we all get together and we crunch each other's stories and scripts and art pages and such. And the energy and the enthusiasm that always comes out of those workshops is always just so invigorating. And life has thrown me a curve lately where I've not been able to go to those workshops as frequently as I once did. And I miss that immensely. But the advice is finding your people, finding your circle, getting a few people that you trust that will give you honest feedback. And it's not to say collaborating, but just sharing with them, going in and providing honest critiques for each other so that you get better at that. Don't let life take that away from you in terms of schedules and work and responsibilities, and carving out one time for one more thing during the week can be really, really challenging. And I know that. If you can find your circle and stick with that and encourage each other in positive ways, but also in critical ways and challenge ideas and make each other better as a creator, whatever your discipline, that's invaluable. And that's something that I would always encourage everybody to try and pursue.
I got 2 pieces of advice in the same week about 6 years ago, and it sort of springboarded things to where the current momentum that I've been chasing now for about 6 years. I'll go with one of them from Kit Seaton, the writer-artist or one of the writers and the artist on Norway from Image Comics. She was a professor of mine at Cal State Fullerton when I was in the grad program. And I think myself, like a lot of people, I was working hard at what I was doing, but I was hesitant to show it to the world, waiting until I had reached some kind of personal standard of, okay, I'm good enough now. I can actually jump out there and start showing my work and trying to find work. And it was before class one afternoon, and she'd asked about something I was working on, and I forget what it was at that time, but she came back with hey, you should be sending this around. Get this pitch out there. There's no reason that you can't be working professionally while you're still in school. I acted on that. In fact, I think the pitch was probably one of the original iterations for Hush Ronin. And I got another piece of advice from Marco Finnegan that same week to start advertising my availability on what was then, of course, Twitter. Those 2 things changed everything for me.
Is there anything I haven't touched on you'd like me to ask you during this interview?
One thing, Kurt, that I'd want to make sure that everybody knows, because with crowdfunding comics and such, there's a lot of variety in terms of the status of projects. Thistle Issue One is done. It is 24 pages. It is jam-packed. The comic is finished. All aspects of the work are done. From a risk standpoint, from a backer, if you are a fan of indie comics, there is 0 risk to you. The only risk is how many of the variant covers you want to pick up, because there's 2 choices there, and they're both fantastic. The comic is finished, and so we are so proud of the fact that we're going to be able to deliver this into the hands of the backers. And we just want to make sure everybody knows that when you're scrolling the absolute wealth of projects out there on crowdfunding, that if this old school sword and sorcery fantasy comic is appealing to you, that the project is done. And so you're going to get that comic in your hand if you can back us, but we need you to bring a friend and get a few more backers to help us as well.
Rightly so. I mean, or else you're not going to be able to make issue 2 of Thistle.
And then Kurt will be disappointed. So we don't want to disappoint Kurt.
I will be, because then I won't be able to get to talk to all 3, and maybe we'll change the time zone so we can get your amazing colorist as well. So it'll be 3 a.m. for us, but it'll be PM for her. What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Ooh, that's a good question. When I was in grade 9, I wrote a epic poem about being in a plane crash and being captured by a cannibalistic monster. It was kind of inspired by the sort of poems that Bill Watterson would write. I'm thinking of A Nauseous Nocturne from the intro to one of the Calvin and Hobbes anthologies. I remember how delighted my teacher was and like getting laughs from my classmates, how exciting I found that.
I took creative writing in my senior year of high school for obvious reasons. I didn't know necessarily what to expect of it, but at the end of the year, she was my favorite teacher, and it's the only class I got an A in. So I guess that says something. I went and got her to sign my yearbook, and in my yearbook she wrote, "Jason, we're not supposed to have favorites, but," and that was how she left it, and that's stuck with me. That whatever flailing attempts at storytelling that I was putting onto pages, and as a 17-year-old high school kid, that this creative writing teacher, and that was sort of, she was English and creative writing, and that was her 2 disciplines for the high school, that stuck with her enough that she made a personalized comment in my yearbook as opposed to just wish you well or good luck in life. That was something that stuck with me, and it's still stuck with me to this day, obviously, for a long time, because I made an impression upon her so much that she wanted to let me know.
I love that. It's great having supportive people and teachers in your lives to make your creativity worthwhile. And the questions are these. And there are no wrong answers, by the way, but if you go see your psychologist afterward, I'm not paying your bill. Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
I don't want to say it's a cliched answer, but I guess for me, especially when I think about my comic book writing, the person that inspired me to write the types of stories I'm trying to tell now was Frank Miller. And that was his run on Daredevil, because I was a big superhero fan, of course, growing up in high school, and as all of us were, and collected all those comics. But I didn't discover Miller's run on Daredevil until I was in my 20s, late teens, early 20s. And I was done high school, and I was starting to collect comics. And I found a story that was very adult in its tone and in its consequences. And it was not something that, in my limited experience, because obviously I hadn't been exposed to enough good stories from a comic book standpoint, not novels, but comics, I hadn't encountered that before, where the hero could lose in a big way, and the consequences would stick. It was just really just exciting and invigorating. And so I became a big fan of that run and referenced it a lot when I started to think about the types of stories that I wanted to tell.
I feel like inspirations for me it's kind of this constant enormous game of musical chairs, and there's always somebody seated and somebody not. The one that comes to mind, at least to where I'm at now, and I don't think I've answered with this person before in this capacity, but the artist Joshua Hickson, and specifically his work on Shanghai Red in 2018, seeing that artwork and then revisiting, say, similar work by like David Mazzucchelli. I'm not saying like I was seeing my own work reflected in it, but I saw something that I deeply enjoyed, and I felt like this is a goal that I can shoot for with what I'm doing, to produce work that creates this same kind of emotional resonance, has the same kind of realistic effect. That was a big catapult early on where I was working professionally.
Well, for me, I always bounced between different creative pursuits. I was obsessed with poetry in high school, and then music. I was in a hip hop group. I have a lot of rap songs I wrote back in the day, and then screenwriting, and then comics. And I always struggled to finish projects, which I think is very common for lots of creatives. I think part of the reason I struggled to finish is that I'm very critical. I have what I call editor brain, which works great when you're being an editor and somebody else is bearing the burden of creative generation. That's the piece that I struggle with. And I saw it was an interview with Dan Harmon early in the early days of Rick and Morty. And he, I think he was asked, like, what advice would you give to people? And he said something along the lines of, I'm looking over here because this is literally my desktop wallpaper here. You're a very critical person. You know you can make something that sucks. You live in terror of it. So do that and then criticize it and fix it. And for whatever reason, for me, that sort of blew the dam open. Having a creative I really respected say he struggled with just making something and sort of giving me permission, like, just make something that sucks. You're a good editor. You'll be able to fix it. That idea, like, of, some creatives, you find something and then you shape it, right? If you're a potter, you get a chunk of clay. If you're a sculptor, you get a piece of marble. If you're a writer, you get the dreaded blank page, right? And same for an artist. And yeah, being told just make something bad and then you can make it good was, I don't know why I didn't think of it. I needed somebody to tell me that. And my outputs and my completion rates tripled after learning that.
So now I have to ask, is one of these perks a rap by Leland, the master wordsmith?
Maybe it should be. I haven't written a rap in 10 years, but I still got it. I still got bars.
The Thistle rap by Leland. There you go.
Oh,
there's another backer milestone reward, right?
I occasionally come up with nuggets like this these days. But
there you go.
It is what it is. From a professional standpoint, you are all creative and successful in your respective fields. And of course, Thistle is completion. So we just have to get it into the hands of the masses. So you're successful in that regard as well. Do you consider yourselves personally successful?
Imposter syndrome's a real bitch, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, successful. I mean, I'm ticking a lot of boxes in terms of creative endeavors that I've wanted to do. Like I've wanted to write comic books since I was 14 years old. And Leland and I talk about this. We talked about this at our workshops all the time. If you've written a comic script, congratulations, you're now a comic book writer. It doesn't matter whether it was published. It doesn't matter if anybody's even drawn it. The job of the writer is to write the script. And if you've completed your script, as rough as that first draft is, congratulations, you're now a comic book writer. Does professional mean only published? Does professional mean only that's something that's made it to print, that you've actually shared out there, or you posted it online, you've had a web comic or something, and now you're professional? I would never put anybody into a box and to try and define that. But for myself, I've done published freelance comic book writing. I've done published freelance tabletop role-playing game design. I've been a game master and hosted my own actual play role-playing game stream now. I had the delusional dream of actually getting a short story published by Wizards of the Coast that was published in one of their anthologies, set in the Forgotten Realms, which was, like where I lived in my teen years for so many years, and then getting to be a contributor to that space. So I've been able to tick a lot of boxes to say, yeah, I'm a professional freelance writer. Sure. But I think for me, and that's kind of what Thistle represents now, is that I've contributed to other people's stories, and now this is my story. And so whether I will ever claim ownership of the professional tag, if I can get Thistle into the hands of everybody, a complete story that originated up in my brain and then came to life through this amazing collaboration, that will feel like a pretty big accomplishment on a professional level, and something I could point to and be really proud of.
Yes, but are you personally successful?
Oh, personally successful. Oh, sure. Thank you for reframing that. I mean, sure, because I've got a day job that's been my career for over 20 years. That's successful. I have got a beautiful spouse. I've got amazing children. I've got wonderful friends, and I've got stable housing and some of those core benefits. So personally successful, personally, that absolutely. There's all the reasons that I can point to say that I'm very successful and very fortunate on the personal level.
I will probably never see myself as successful. I think dopamine is a harsh mistress, and whatever bar you think you hit, you think when you hit it, you'll be happy. Then you get there and the novelty wears off, because that's how that's how we're designed. That's how human motivation works. I love Jason's response. I think gratitude is so vital. But I think if I were writing 4 comics a month for the big 2, I wouldn't think I was successful. I would be thinking, how do I catch up with Alan Moore? That would be, that's how my brain works. That said, I'm very happy with where I am. When I look at where I was 8 years ago, when I was like, I'm going to start making comics, I'm farther than I could have, reasonably dreamed myself to be right now. So I am, in my best moments, I'm happy, but no, I don't feel successful yet.
If we subtract financial success from it, and it's just personal success, I feel like I've been pretty successful. I worked in retail for upwards of 20 years. I felt trapped by it, like all of everything I'd done in high school, all the jobs that I'd had, I was kind of buttonholed into that sector. I was working for Apple retail at the time, and I came to work one day dressed similar to how I am now, with a button-up shirt and one of my sport coats, which I tend to wear from fall into spring. And one of my coworkers complimented me on it and told me I had kind of a professorly look. And just offhand, I joked back, I'm like, "Oh, dress for the job you want, right?" Except this time it didn't feel like a joke. That stuck with me. And later that same evening, I came home and I looked into applying to grad school, which I did. And within 18 months of that joking comment, I was teaching my first class in higher education. It's been going well since then. I do have to agree with Leland on the dopamine being a harsh mistress. I am always chasing that next dopamine rush. And I think sometimes success is just the ability to always keep that carrot dangling in the pursuit of what others might perceive as success. Sometimes the journey is the destination.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Alcoholism.
Yeah, that's a given. Yeah. Hookers and blowers, the other option, but
Yeah.
I just eat failure. Learning to love failure, learning to love the workshops like that Jason and I have talked about. Learning to love bombing. I draw a lot of inspiration from stand-up comics. I think that is such a pure art form, in that in order to make your art and refine your art, it has to just be tested in front of people. Like there is no self-deception in comedy. Either what you do makes people laugh or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you throw it out, you rework it, and you redo it. And the more you can strip away your insulation between you and some kind of audience, the sooner you will start making good stuff. So like failure is life. It is growth. It is, you need it as much as it hurts. Like you need to get hurt. So sometimes at workshops, I will literally say, like, make me bleed. Like, I'll get downright masochistic. Like, you need people to be honest with you about how your art makes them feel. If everybody just smiles and says, "Oh, it was really good," nobody's growing, nobody's improving. Yeah, you gotta fail. You gotta fail, and you gotta learn to love to fail.
Yeah, you're looking for real answers, of course, right? And so for me, I have avoided risk my entire life. I've not taken chances on things for risk of failure. I've not taken chances on things for risk of not succeeding, for not feeling successful, to use that word that we just came back to. And here we are, like, laying bare my soul as we stare at the 12 days remaining on the Thistle Kickstarter, and we are nowhere near the funding goal yet. And so the risk of failure is absolutely there. And I'm not afraid of it, maybe like I would have been, 10, 20 years ago, but at the same time, I certainly don't seek it out. I don't relish the chance to do it. I always feel like I want to know, like, why would I put myself out there if it doesn't have a reasonable chance of succeeding? Why would I put myself out there if there's a reasonable chance that someone else is going to respond positively to what I do? That is something I've wrestled with my whole personal life. It's something I've wrestled with my whole professional life as a writer and as a creator, because it is so much easier to not try. It's so much easier to play it safe and to fall back on the things that you're good at. And you take for granted that the skills and the things that you've mastered. So you can go back to the well and rely on those things to get you through again and again. but to try something new and to challenge yourself, knowing that failure is around the corner. And the workshops that Leland's talking about, right? Those have been immensely helpful to grow me in chasing failure and seeking it out and saying, okay, this idea wasn't good enough, but then to be encouraged enough to say, but I actually got a better idea I can come back with. That's been an important part of my personal journey.
Makes me want to paraphrase. I think this is a paraphrase from Mark Twain. And he said, never take too much from a lesson. A cat that sits on a hot stove will never sit on a hot stove again, but it'll never sit on a cold one either. And I think it's differentiating those failures. Some are like a forest fire. It becomes a foundation for new growth. But then I can think of a couple of failures in the past that have been a little bit more like Chernobyl, where it's a completely fenced off area, never to be seen or touched again. I've regretted that sometimes not going back in and using the failure as a foundation for growth. But I completely agree with Jason and Leland were saying that, without failure as the contrast to success really doesn't have any meaning.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a writer, an editor, a letterer, an artist, a colorist. Maybe you've inspired them on a creative path that you don't know about yet. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Well, I'm going to steal Leland's line a moment ago where he talked about gratitude. Gratitude is very inspiring to me because it sometimes can be in short supply these days. And gratitude is something that really permeates the independent comics community. And for all the cesspool that is social media, right, there are these little moments of gratitude that shine through. That's inspiring. And you see established, professionals, established creators encouraging and inspiring a younger and the next generation and the next generation of creators coming up to follow in their footsteps, but also to blaze a new trail, to not just do what they've done, but to do something new. But I think that piece is so important, because otherwise then you're just alone in the void trying to create something for yourself. And some people can do that and be successful, but I think that support and that acknowledgement from those that came before you, that you can do this, and then when you succeed at whatever it is that you're attempting, you're going to be the inspiration for those that follow as well. And I think a lot of that stems from gratitude, thanking somebody for their contribution, thanking somebody for sharing something with you, whether you enjoyed it or not, that's okay. But just the acknowledgement to keep trying, it makes all the difference in the world. It has to me. And one of my favorite parts of being part of the independent comics community is getting to just signal boost everybody else whenever I can to say, hey, listen, I so appreciate that you're putting your work out there. It's inspiring me to try and do the same.
Anything that crosses generational boundaries is true. I think the most important thing, if you want to inspire the next generation, is to be honest. And that can be very difficult. You got to be willing to be vulnerable, right? You got to be willing to share the dark parts of yourself. When I think about one of the, a book that I carry with me forever, it's Lord of the Rings. And that is just a grim interrogation of the corruptibility of even children. That book was vital to me. That book helped, I read that book when I was 11 or 12. And that book really helped me think about and reflect on my own aggression and my own, and peer pressure and my desire to fit in as a teenager. Like, that's a story that I will carry with me forever. And, it's about confronting something real and a little scary about human nature.
I think for me, it's openness and accessibility. And like a lot of the people that have inspired me have had a lot about visibility, not necessarily like having access to the person or their life, being honest with the work, being honest in what you're doing, and just staying true to that work ethic, I think is a big part of it. Where success starts to snowball or people become wildly successful, I think there's a bit of amnesia that happens with their origin story. And it can be difficult to see others who are along the same path that you've just climbed. And it's being somewhat, say, irresponsible to not leave things behind you that will help them follow that same path that you are currently on.
If your life was a comic book, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Well, the soundtrack would be easier for me to answer because I listen to so much instrumental movie, cinematic music, right? I mean, I'm wearing the shirt, right? Never tell me the odds. John Williams, just is the soundtrack to half my life, I'm sure. Yeah. But so that would be the music that would be the soundtrack, would be some kind of just epic orchestral, or even a little electronic, but really epic instrumental piece that just has these big crescendos and drops and rises again. and his super thing. But for the title, oh, that's a stump one, because it's so easy to be self-deprecating and, to say something that would be very unkind to yourself. But I would have to think about that a little bit longer to come up with a title for my life that encompasses that entire experience.
I don't know. I think your shirt kind of would be a good enough title.
And I don't disagree with you, so let's go with that. I do like that. I do like that, actually. That's a good answer.
Maybe mine, if I'm not going to be self-deprecating, I will follow JL's lead and I will not be self-deprecating. A good title for my life would be Renaissance Man, I think. I studied science at university. I've worked in construction. I'm artistic. I'm outdoorsy. I feel like a well-balanced person who's got lots of different interests that I've pursued to high levels. As far as the soundtrack, I feel like it might be kind of epic, but it would have a comical undertone. I think my life, were it to ever be made into a good movie, it might be scored by Danny Elfman. Nice. There'd be lots of bouncy horns.
With Willa Wonka as your narrator.
Yeah.
I've got maybe two. Insert pithy title here, or Eternal Doom Scroll of a Feckless Mind.
Nice.
And it would probably be an all-instrumental, or like a symphonic Beatles score.
I'd almost go back to the 8 or 16-bit days of good old retro music, that we used to love on the NES and things like that. But
some MIDI keyboard stuff.
Yeah. I played LucasArts video games way too much, and the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade soundtrack in MIDI format was a bit of my jam. So.
Oh my goodness, I played the heck out of that game as a kid.
Monkey Island, Zack McCracken. Yep.
I could never get through. I could never get past one of the guards in the Nazi castle.
Yeah, that was a tough one because he had two guards coming. Yeah. We'll talk about that.
Kurt, when I was of that age, I would put Ninja Gaiden 1 into my NES, and it had a really cool ninja duel with a MIDI soundtrack that went over it. I would just let that repeat. I would just hit reset so that it would repeat. It would reload the cartridge every time. I wouldn't even play the game because the game was stupid hard. But I loved that little soundtrack, and I would play it on repeat for no other reason than I was the biggest geek in the world. So
all three of you went with the instrumental type soundtrack is very telling in the sense that I'm the same way. So I hate to say it, and we could reminisce easily about our childhoods for the next hour or two, but I have to say that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank all of you for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you so much, Kurt, for your time today.
Before I let you all go, where can we find you? How can we support you? Where is this amazing Kickstarter campaign? When does it end? And any other social media you would like to promote?
So Thistle Issue One is on Kickstarter now. There are only 12 days remaining. We are falling short of our funding goals, so we need everybody's support for this amazing sword and sorcery fantasy comic. There's also a Linktree, Thistle the Comic on Linktree, Thistle the Comic Book, apologies, on Linktree, which has the link to the Kickstarter, it has the link to the socials for the campaign, and it has links to all of our media appearances and all of the interviews, and we will, of course, have Two Geeks Talking added to that Linktree as well very soon. You can find myself on the site formerly known as Twitter at digital_Collins, and you can find me on Blue Sky at Digital Collins. And I've also got a link tree for all my other role-playing game work and my actual play work on JL Collins on Linktree. So you can find me there as well.
And you can find me at Linktree/Leland Writes. All my other stuff is available through there. I got free short comics you can check out. I got my online store. You can buy my comics directly from me. There's links to Thistle and lots of other projects I've worked on. And if you want to hire me, you can message me through there and get my skills as an editor or letterer.
You can find me at www.jschiek.com. It's JSCHIEK. And on social media, I keep it easy by using the same handle on all platforms: X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. It's just at Schiekapedia, my last name, SCHIEKAPEDIA. And I'm posting new stuff, all kinds of invective on there all the time.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others literally on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO. If you do the number 2, that's a website you just don't want to go to, so don't. Website's going through a complete rebuild because it's been 10 or so years. So go to our YouTube channel. That's always updated, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast is back at twogeekstalking.podbean.com, or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.